and welcome to the Inspired Leaders Book Club, which is brought to you by 3minuteleadership.com. I'm Christine Boston, and today we have a special Christmas governance edition with Gillian Cam Kathryn Bishop. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining me today. Just to give a bit of an introduction to each of you, Kathryn, you are an Associate Fellow at SED Business School, which is part of Oxford University. You were the first Chair of the Welsh Revenue Authority. You're a champion of inclusion, particularly for women, and have a CBE for Services to Diversity and Public Administration. So thanks for joining. And Gillian is an executive coaching and consultancy business director, a senior independent director at Wessex Water, a main board director at Clerical Medical Investment Group, a worldwide partner of the Hay Group, and former member of the General Medical Council, where Gillian led a governance review following the Shipman Inquiry. So hello both.
Hello.
Hello.
You clearly both have a lot of experience, which you've brought together in your book, Board Talk, which we're going to discuss today. Here's my copy. Really enjoyed reading that. But before we get kind of really into the book, I'm interested to know how you got to this point. So I wondered if you could each say a little bit about your kind of career journey, where you've started, what your path has been, and how you kind of come to hold these senior board level positions. So I wonder, Kathryn, if I could come to you first.
Sure. So like most people, my career has been full of surprises. I sometimes ask people, when you were 14, did you know what you wanted to be? And I was pretty clear. I knew exactly what I wanted to be. I had no idea what that job would actually be like, but I was pretty clear, and I thought I would just go straight there. Well, like most people, my career journey has gone all over the place. I have found myself working for a consulting firm in the city, Accenture. I then worked for a financial services organization. I worked for a university. I've been a line manager, a director, a consultant, a non-executive director, and a teacher. So for the last 20 years, amongst other things, part of my portfolio has been teaching at the Said Business School at the University of Oxford, as you said. But careers move in all sorts of different directions. And in fact, my first book is actually, I wrote that about women's careers, which in particular experience all sorts of winds of change.
Right, follow that. Well, my background, I started off in manufacturing engineering and did a graduate traineeship and ended up in industrial relations. And then from there, I had a sort of career as an executive director in financial services and information technology. And I decided that I would add some non-exec director roles to my portfolio, and discovered interesting things about, well, who owns the organisation? When you sit on a board, you get involved in the remuneration committee. How do those actually work? What are the vested interests? How does the board actually work? So it was from the executive side through to the non-exec side that I suddenly found myself asking all these questions about what's actually going on here, and saw firsthand the importance of governance, really.
And actually also saw firsthand, I think, for both of us, the importance of the board as a group of leaders setting the tone for good or ill.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? And it's varied. So I've been on charity boards as a non-exec director, and I think governance to many sounds, feels really boring and dry, doesn't it? But I know kind of your talk in Bristol, you really made that very engaging, and in reality board conversations, they're very varied, aren't they? You cover all sorts of different and interesting things like strategy, culture, all sorts of things. So yeah, it's very varied what you can get into, and I think very interesting, like for those who make that move.
Christine, I agree with you. Potentially, board conversations can be incredibly varied and should be varied and interesting. But actually, one of the reasons we wrote this book is that Gillian and I were sitting around having coffee one day, frankly, letting off a bit of steam about some of the boards we'd served on in private, voluntary, public sectors, some of which are, pretty good, varied conversations, as you say, and some of which are, frankly, visibly dysfunctional. And so we were letting off steam about that. And Gillian said to me, yeah, she said, it reminds me of A-level biology. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not quite with you. What do you mean? She said, you're in the lab, you're given a dead rat to dissect, and you open it up, and it's all beautifully structured, and everything is connected, and the organs are all in the right place, and it's beautifully organized. But here's the thing, she said, the rat is dead. Nothing is happening. And I looked at her and I roared with laughter and said, that is absolutely brilliant. We've both been on boards like that. You should write a book about that. And then I said, no, I'd like to write a book with you. And that's how it started.
That's how it started. So how did you two meet? Because it sounds like you've got quite different experiences. You had different paths. How did you kind of come together and end up working together?
I can't remember originally, but we've known each other sort of 25 years. But in lots of ways, we've got very common things in common, background in financial services, some work in the public sector. So there's lots of things that we've got in common. But it was really interesting because we meet with fellow authors and they say, oh, how could you possibly write a book together? Well, for us, it was indecently fun, actually. We used to meet, have coffee, chat away, agree to write up various bits, then come back. And the good thing is on the big issues, on like the importance of the board and the importance of conversation, we both felt the same things. But we had different styles, which was great, and different, as Kathryn would call them, superpowers that we actually brought to the party. So it was great fun, born out of a passion for how boards work.
Yeah, and I mean, writing a book, it could be quite lonely, isolating work. So I'm sure it's it's really enjoyable to actually be working with someone who's as passionate about a subject as you are.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, my first book I wrote by myself, and I'm an extrovert, and it was very lonely. So writing with Gillian was, as she says, enjoyable, stimulating, fascinating.
And I'm glad that's come together. So the book then, Board Talk, an accessible guide to the business of being a board director through the lens of 18 crucial conversations. It's a really useful guide and reflection tool with lots of reflection questions, lots of really practical things to help individuals think through and put into practice lots of great ideas. So do you wish that something like this had been available in your early board careers? And how do you think it can help leaders fulfill their roles today?
I definitely wish it had been there. And one of the most reassuring about writing the book was Kathryn going, but that's how I felt too. Oh, if I'd only known that. And so it was based on the kind of book that you want to give your daughter or your son as they go through their careers, really. And we did want it to be deeply practical and be a sort of reference guide, an ongoing reference guide that you just keep on your desk, really.
So we also wrote it to encourage people to consider board membership, whether that's on the school governor's board, school governing body, whether that's on a charity, a private or a public sector organisation, whatever it may be. Because the book focuses on conversation, it's usable in any one of those contexts. Boards need good people. And many people, I think, feel, I couldn't be on a board. I'm not an expert in this field. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a lawyer. But actually, what boards need is people who engage with the right subjects, as you said, Christine, who talk and listen, who think. And any of us and all of us can do that. And so the book's primary purpose was to encourage people to consider taking a board position. The other thing I would say is I'm very impressed that you read it, Christine, because when we wrote it, we also wanted to acknowledge that many people are very busy and don't have time to read a book from the beginning to the end. So the 18 conversations idea was about allowing someone who is going into a board meeting where they're going to talk about, let's say, risk, and they can turn to that chapter, to that conversation, and get something useful and reinforcing to use it in that circumstance.
Yeah, you can certainly dip in and dip out. It's a really good reference book. You can take off the shelf and think exactly that. Oh, I'm interested in we're thinking about people conversations today. What are the things we could think about? And easy and quick to kind of get those ideas before you go into your board meeting and start having those conversations, or even to help you kind of get your thoughts together beforehand. Definitely, really helpful for that. Yeah, useful just for reference. But I did read it cover to cover, sat down, and it is just, I wanted to get a proper feel for it, and understand the thinking, and yeah, found that a really valuable use of time. So thank you for that. I really recognise what you're saying about there's so many people who think, oh, board position's not for me, I don't have anything to bring to it. But I also know from my experience as a charity leader, there are many, many charities of a wide range of different sizes, lots of community organisations and smaller charities that just need good people. They need people who have got a wide range of skills and experiences, come from lots of different backgrounds. There's really an opportunity, at all levels for everyone, isn't there? And I found it absolutely instrumental in developing my skills for a career in leadership, to get that strategic knowledge and experience. And I always say to people, if they're kind of looking to develop their career, finding a charity board that is the right one for you, that is a fantastic way to be able to develop your CV, build your knowledge and skills and experience, whilst doing something really, making such an important contribution to society. So, like I say, I know many who feel they can't put themselves forward, and I know lots of women in particular who have worked a lot in the women's sector, and I hear lots from women who are extremely well qualified, highly skilled. They're in very good jobs, and they still think they need more training and experience before they'd be able to contribute in that way. So thinking about those women, what would you say to inspire them?
I think I'd say to them, when you go into a board meeting, just remember that your view is as valid as anybody else's, and be cognizant of some of the things around group dynamics. A long time ago, I used to be on a board, and the first conversation was about playing golf at the weekend. So be cognizant to the kind of group thinking, cohesion, and think about how you can play a part to make sure you've got that place in the boardroom and that you are being heard. But there's a lot comes down to a great chair as well, as I'm sure Kathryn can expand on.
Yeah, I'd particularly reference the first conversation in the book, because the first of the 18 conversations is a conversation with yourself about what kind of board could you join, what have you got to offer, how to do research on whether that particular board position, whatever it may be, charity, school governing body, whatever it may be, how to do research to discover exactly what is needed and what you have to offer. And that conversation sets out 10 questions to ask yourself. And it would be a great thing to read as you go into 2026. If you think perhaps you might have a New Year's resolution, which is, this year I might explore being on a board. That would be a great resolution. Great for the organisations, and as you say, great for your own development.
That is a really good New Year's resolution. So I hope we inspire lots of people today to go and do that. Because I know, I've worked with lots of small charities, and I know many of them are really crying out for good trustees. It can be difficult to fill board positions. And so, yeah, I hope that we manage to help many more people from this discussion today to explore that. So you talked a bit about kind of board dysfunction. Is there, can you give any kind of like hints and nuggets about what I'm really thinking is, can you tell us about like the most dysfunctional board you work with, and how you fix that? But maybe you can't go in, that's perhaps a big question. It's maybe, not something you want to get kind of too involved in. So can you give us a bit of an example of like, what would be a good example of dysfunction on a board, and like, kind of as an independent board member, how to go about doing something about that?
Do you want to start, Gillian?
I think one of the things as a board member is one of the things that I really try and pay attention to is making sure that your board that you sit on, that it's not just individual separate board meetings, that it's part of an ongoing process of governance. And you have responsibility to strategy. Well, it's quite difficult to do strategy in one particular meeting with various papers. So you might need to build in time to have reflective time to get to know each other, time to strategize. Make sure that you've not packed out the board meetings with lots of stuff that could be done elsewhere in committees or by the executives, and just make sure that you're happy that the chair is creating the right kind of environment for everybody to contribute in. So I think that's probably what I'd say. And whenever I've sat in a board meeting where I thought, why am I feeling uncomfortable? It's either because we're trying to do strategy in the margin, or we haven't got the right data, or everybody's just sitting very quiet because the chair has said we've got a lot to get through today. So in brackets, don't ask too many questions.
Yes. I've certainly seen moments of dysfunction on boards where we don't listen to each other, where the interaction is just a series of speeches, not a conversation, where people are delving into inappropriate detail at great length, detail which perhaps as an outsider they don't necessarily understand. As Gillian says, something that could be taken outside the meeting. And there are various ways in which one can address that. So one of the boards I sit on has a buddy system. So anybody new coming onto the board has the opportunity to develop an informal relationship with somebody who's been there for a while. That can be useful, frankly, both for the new person and the existing board member. One of the boards I was chair of, we had a process of performance reviews. So each director would have a conversation at the beginning of the year and another one at the end of the year about areas of focus and how the year's gone. One of the other boards I sit on, at the end of each meeting, the chair would say, right, just before we do any other business, let's have a quick comment from everybody around the room about how they felt today's meeting has gone. What went well? What could we do better next time? And that signaled a sort of open attention to how are we working together for the good of this organisation, which is very positive.
Yeah, that's always helpful, isn't it? Reflection at the end of the meeting, like how did this meeting go? What do we change for next time? And then trying to implement that can, help like reflect on, have we had good conversations? So, is there anything we could have changed that would have improved the process? And the buddying system as well, I think, can be really helpful, because I think as a new trustee coming into a new organisation on a new board, it's not always clear how things work, and you might see something, think I really want to influence that, or I want to raise this, and it's not clear how. So that buddying system is a good mechanism, isn't it, for outside to kind of learn a little bit more about what is the culture here, and how does the agenda get influenced, and how we're going to make change. Because I guess, like I say, particularly on charity boards, individuals I think are going in because they're passionate about the organisation and the change that they're trying to make. So finding constructive ways to do that and being clear about process. So when I was at your event in Bristol at UE, I had a conversation with Gillian because she talked about the post office inquiry that had kind of come up in the session, and so I wanted to just explore that a bit. So kind of following the conversation with Gillian on the recommendation, I kind of listened to the podcast of the post office inquiry, and I obviously kind of watched the ITV drama, as so many did, Mr. Bates in the post office, and it's a really fascinating case. So I wondered if you thought that if the kind of that board of directors of the post office at that time had read your book, how do you think it might make a difference, or how would you hope it could have made a difference to that situation?
I hope it would have made a difference, because it would make support individual board members talking amongst themselves to each other. And I think one of the things that happened during COVID, where there were lots of meetings on Zoom, this is not necessarily the post office, and it's those conversations in the sidelines that you have with other board members, where you start to realise that maybe this board member actually had the same worries that you had. And I think that's something that board, spending time together and having what I call the car park conversations. And I had a sense that there weren't enough car park conversations. I think one of the things that boards grapple with is big projects, and big IT projects is particularly difficult. And I got a sense from going through all of the information and the various videos and things like that, was that some people kind of checked out of that process and said, well, I'm not a technical person. And yes, you know, people aren't technical people, but you should have technical people on your board who'll be able to interrogate this. But also sometimes it's the most basic questions. And there was information about the prosecutions of postmasters and how it went up exponentially after this system was put in. So you don't need to be a technical expert, but you do need to pay attention to what the risks are around the technical side of things. And that's something where you do want informed colleagues as well.
And I think, as Gillian says, the power of not just the question, even if you're asking a question in an area where you're not expert, but actually the second question, making sure that you are given a clear explanation, because in the circumstances that Gillian's just referred to, the exponential increase in the number of prosecutions, a good question would have been, so give me all the possible reasons why this might be happening. The obvious one that was offered was, it's the new system is much, much more efficient. Well, what other possible explanations are there? That sounds like a silly question, but actually in a functional board, it's a good question to ask and often generates some useful conversation that takes you to a place you otherwise wouldn't get to.
And that's another good point, actually. You know, what it makes me think about is kind of in these sorts of situations, if you've got a board member that doesn't agree, often what happens is they resign. Is that the right and most helpful action always, or is it actually, can it be more helpful for them to actually stay and continue saying, I'm really worried about this?
Well, I think the chair must create an atmosphere sufficiently open so that a variety of views can be heard. I mean, after all, that's one of the many reasons you have a board. There's enormous amounts of research that diverse perspectives contribute to better insights and solutions, particularly where the problem is complicated. But that only works, of course, if you listen to those voices, if they're heard. And so that sort of functional ability to say, yeah, interesting, but I respectfully disagree, and then to move forward, I think is a vital piece of board dialogue.
Yeah, with that, go on, Gillian.
No, I think the other thing is being able to triangulate information. So there's the data you get in the board meeting, there's the data you get from interacting with staff as you go through the organisation, and then there's what the executive are telling you about what that data means. So it's kind of helpful to look at it from lots of different perspectives. And of course, you will always have this asymmetry of information where the executive will know so much more than you as a non-exec know.
And as you said, Gillian, you know, in the post office example, you know, kind of the system was implemented, and then there were many more cases. You know, I watching the kind of drama and listening to the podcast, you know, just made me think I can't understand why a chief executive and board members would not be asking more questions, you know, and really looking to understand, why is this changed? You know, why were there, you know, why are there so many more problems now being highlighted? And then, of course, you know, there were complaints, weren't there? You know, there were people writing in, like, so it just is remarkable to me that it has taken so long to, you know, for that to kind of all really come to light, and those postmasters get that justice.
And I think one of the things was a sheer number of people. I can't recall the figure offhand. I don't know if you can, Kathryn, about the number of people who served on that board over a specific period. And it was massive. So there's no kind of continuity of thought or continuity of pursuing issues. And I think the other thing was they either didn't get the information, or they did get the information, it was explained in a different way. They potentially received false reassurances. And at the end of the day, if an executive don't want you to have the truth, then you won't get the truth.
I think we also have to acknowledge it does take courage to ask question after question. But one of the things we hope that the book will underline is that that's a legitimate role for a member of the board. It isn't you being ridiculously terrier-like and hanging on to a pet idea of yours. That is the job, to ask questions and get clear explanations. And frankly, if the person you're talking to can't explain it clearly, then probably they don't understand it well enough. So your second question or your third question is serving a purpose in ensuring that everybody is better informed.
And asking the right questions and in the right way, isn't it?
Indeed.
So it's not kind of confrontational. You're not, it's not creating conflict.
Exactly.
It is really just like searching out what is happening and what is the truth. I like the idea of the car park conversation. I've certainly heard from colleagues who have dealt with some difficult board situations, and some have been, some have actually kind of led to charity closure, but just that a reflection later on about when should I have said something. What's the reflection on that? I mean, I think I know what you're going to say, but asking it anyway.
Well, I think there's a piece in the book about trusting your instinct, and that's the minute you get a feeling that something's not right, I think you need to sit in a darkened room and kind of interrogate, why am I feeling this? Because the difficulty is quite often when I've had a situation where something I've thought about has proved right, I knew in my inner soul that it wasn't right. And it's just a question of surfacing that. So I'd say pay attention to that.
And also through your informal links with and contacts with other board members, explore some of those issues, exactly as Gillian says, in the car park, before the meeting, online or on the telephone, just to get some sense of how other people are feeling. One of the best board meetings I was ever in was horribly overrunning, and the chairman came to us at the coffee break and said, "We're not going to get through all this. What do you all think is the most significant issue which we should move up the agenda?" And suddenly, with one accord, all of us said, "Oh, it's this one." And we hadn't known that beforehand. And had we known it, the whole meeting might have gone better because we'd have got to that significant issue. So sure enough, we moved that one up right to the top. And it was the richest and most searching discussion with the most far-reaching decisions and actions as a consequence of that informal coffee break conversation.
Yeah, my last podcast was on a book called Feminine Intelligence, and there was quite a lot about spirituality in that. Like being connected to your spiritual self, kind of whatever that looks like, and that being important in leadership, but also like being really in tune with your intuition, being able to trust your instincts, that kind of concept of feeling. How does it feel? That's quite a feminine energy, isn't it? But if you can, kind of that was the whole point of the book, like we all have access to feminine energy and feminine intelligence, and the value of kind of really drawing on that and bringing that in is really valuable. So the other thing that kind of reflected on around the post office inquiry was around the lack of accountability. We know that, but the kind of defense of the reliance of the computer system, regardless of what the humans are saying, what is the human impact and all the humans that are involved. And also, I mean, I kind of like I was growing up as computers were coming in. So I'm really familiar with this idea that you shouldn't completely trust them. Like there has to be that human kind of interrogation of what the computer is telling you. And it's never been more true than around AI, has it? So yeah, like have you got reflections on that? I mean, I was really astounded about that, kind of listening to it. It was just constantly like the IT system, but there was a lot of people involved here, and then those alarm bells must have been going off for, you know, quite some time.
In regard to the post office, I think they were, and there were people. One of the other things that comes out in a lot of the governance work we've done is the importance of whistleblowers. And in almost every whistleblowing, every corporate governance failure or charitable failure, whatever, somewhere there was a whistleblower saying, you know, this isn't right. And I think if you're sitting on a board, you need to think about how you are connected to the whole whistleblowing process and how you will get to hear these things. But yes, I mean, as I said, if you listen to the hours and hours of video and podcasts, it's just very salutary how individuals were raising things, but they didn't necessarily know that other people were raising them. You know, they had experienced non-execs on that board. These weren't amateurs.
One of the things I think I'm constantly reminded of is when you join a board of any organisation of any type, one of the most useful things you can do in the first few days is to spend time with people in the organisation, with the permission of the chief executive and the chair, of course. But as part of a useful process of induction, there's nothing like seeing the people who are using those computer systems that you're going to talk about, who are working in those buildings that you are thinking about closing or moving or redoing, who are engaging with the customers that you talk about on the board. And whenever I've remembered to do that at the beginning of a new board role, it has absolutely paid dividends in terms of my knowledge, but also coming back to your earlier point about feeling and intuition, in terms of my sense of connection with the organisation. These are people who come to work to do this job, whatever it may be, and the board is serving them as they serve our customers. And we need to remember that.
Absolutely. So I'm conscious of time. I know I need to be kind of wrapping up this conversation so that you can get back on with your busy days. But I just wanted to ask you one final question. And that is, if there was one key leadership lesson or message from this book, what would it be?
I think for me, it's kind of actually governance matters. It's really, really important. And it's not an add-on. It's not a compliance issue. And I always think about governance like the human body. Do you want your governance to be in the heart of your organisation, or do you want it to be a blind-ended laguna, which is your appendix, which if it goes toxic can kill you?
That's a great image. So the thing I was going to say was that we talk a lot about governance processes and structures, but governance is a human process. It's about the eyeball to eyeball conversation that we have across a table, the degree to which we're listening or not, and the conversations that carry on outside the boardroom. And the humanness of that process, I hope, will encourage people to think about taking up a board role.
Definitely. And I really hope we've inspired many today to take that step. So to wrap up then, in closing, if anybody wants to connect with you or find out more, where's the best place? I mean, we should also say, I think you can buy the book in all good bookstores. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, great. And yeah, what's the best way to connect with you?
Well, I'm GillianCam.com. I've got a website and through LinkedIn.
I'm KathrynBishop.com, and I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Fabulous. So I hope everybody kind of goes and looks you up more, finds out a bit more, buys the book. It'd be a great stocking filler, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
This Christmas. Yeah. So
great for those New Year's resolutions. That's what I'm hoping for.
To help you set them. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, this has been really inspiring. Great to kind of learn from you both. Thanks so much for giving your time. And this is the first time I've said it this year, but I wish you both a happy Christmas and a great 2026. Yeah, much success. Thank you for joining.
You too. Thank you very much.